My name is Andrea. Welcome to my channel. Today I am sharing 5 pinecone Christmas DIYs. So let's jump right in. For this DIY, we're making a big, beautiful Christmas wreath. First, I'm making the bow for the wreath. I have this beautiful ribbon with Christmas trees in different patterns. I'm unwinding the ribbon so there's about a 12-inch tail, then making my first loop and twisting it a couple times to keep it together. I'm making another loop slightly bigger than the first one, then giving it a couple twists. I'm making another loop the same size as the second one, and I'm taking it from the side with the ribbon roll, then putting the loop on the other side of the first loop. I'm continuing with this same pattern, creating loops on either side and making them slightly larger than the one before, and twisting each loop a couple times to keep it together. In total, I made 9 loops for my bow. Once it's done, I'm cutting the ribbon tail to be the same size as the other side. I'm weaving some floral wire through the bow and tying it in place to keep it all together. I'm cutting the ends of the ribbon into triangles to finish it off. Now I'm fluffing up all the loops and moving them around to form the bow. To make my burlap wreath, I'm taking a roll of burlap and attaching one end to my wire wreath form with floral wire. Fold the burlap in half and make a loop, then push it partway through the first ring of the wreath form, then push another loop of the burlap partway through the next section of the wreath, and again through the top section. I'm twisting the burlap a couple times, then continuing the same pattern, pushing a loop of burlap through each section of the wreath form. Once the whole wreath is covered with the burlap, cut it off and either tie it or glue it in place. Here is what the wreath looks like covered in burlap. These pine cones are very special because they're actually from my grandma's yard. She saved all the best ones for me to use in my DIYs, and I'm so excited to be using so many of them in today's video. I'm covering the edges of the pine cones with decoupage glue. You could use any white glue or Mod Podge. Then I'm sprinkling salt onto the pine cones. The glue will dry clear and the salt will give a nice light snowy look on the pine cones. I'm taking these Christmas picks I had left over from Christmas time last year. I believe they were from Dollar Tree, and I'm adding them onto my wreath, attaching them with floral wire. Next, I'm figuring out where I want to place my pine cones. I'm using 5 for this project, and I'll be hot gluing them in place. I also have these real evergreen branches I collected, and I'm adding them to the wreath, just poking them through and arranging it among the burlap. These berries are from Dollarama, and I'm taking off a few of them to add to my wreath. Today's video is part of the 5 for 5 challenge hosted by Emily from Farm Charm Chic and Missy from the Crafty Cove, and guest hosted this month by Connie from Connie's Creative Creations. We are all making 5 holiday home decor DIYs for less than $5 each. The link to the playlist is below, so be sure to check it out. This DIY is a hanging kissing ball. I'm using this styrofoam ball, which was 50 cents at the thrift store. You can also use a floral foam ball. You'll see I made a hook with the floral wire, but I do not recommend doing this if you're using a styrofoam ball because it was very difficult to get the wire through, and I ended up not using it anyway. I have all of these evergreen tree branches, and I'm using 11 pine cones for this project. I'm hot gluing all the pine cones around the styrofoam ball. I'm now hot gluing the greenery onto the ball around the pine cones. I'm taking this jute cord and wrapping it around the ball and tying it together at the top. I'll be using this to hang the kissing ball. I'm cutting off some berries from this berry pick and I'm sticking them into the kissing ball. You could also glue them in place if you wanted to. I want to tame this a little bit, so I'm going around and trimming the branches into a bit more of a rounded shape. I definitely should have done this before gluing the pine cones onto the ball, but now I'm adding a snowy effect by painting decoupage glue onto the edges, then sprinkling salt on top. I'm also adding a bit of the glue to some of the berries to create the snowy effect on those as well. This DIY is a lantern centerpiece or mantle decor. I've had this lantern for many years and I'm giving it a Christmas makeover. I'm adding 3 pine cones inside the lantern, starting with the largest at the bottom and the smallest on the top. I'm cutting up these evergreen branches and adding them into the lantern, mostly behind the pine cones with a couple in front and beside. I'm cutting off pieces of this berry pick and adding them into the lantern. The ribbon is left over from last Christmas, and I'm creating a bow for the top of the lantern. First, I'm creating a loop the size I want the bow to be, and I'm cutting the ribbon, leaving a bit extra so it can overlap and be glued together. I cut another piece of ribbon slightly smaller than the first one, and I'm gluing it together to create a loop. Now I'm gluing the smaller loop on top of the larger loop. I'm pinching the middle of the bow together and keeping it in place with floral wire. I'm fluffing up the loops of the bow, and now I'm making the ribbon tails. Since this ribbon is pretty wide, I'm folding each of the 2 pieces in half and gluing them together. And now I'm gluing the ribbon tails to the main part of the bow. This is the finished little bow, which I think is so cute, and I'm gluing it to the top of the lantern. This DIY is a pine cone tree. For this DIY, I'm using 3 pine cones and I'm peeling off each of the pine cone pieces. What I should have done right away, but I did do eventually after getting a few pine cone cuts, is cut off all the sharp bits of the pine cone with scissors. To make the tree, I'm using an empty cracker box. I'm cutting off the tabs of the box, then cutting the box in half. I'm rolling this piece of cardboard into a cone shape and hot gluing it in place. Now I'm cutting off the bottom of the cone so it'll sit flat on the table. Here is the finished cone along with our stash of pine cone pieces. Now it's time to hot glue all the pine cone pieces onto the cardboard cone. I'm placing the largest pieces on the bottom of the cone and saving the smaller pieces for the top. For the bottom row, I'm gluing each piece next to each other all around, slightly hanging off the bottom edge. For all the subsequent rows, focus the glue more on the top of the pine cone piece, pressing the top onto the cardboard cone, slightly overlapping the previous row. When I first tried this, I was gluing the second row of pieces onto the previous row, not touching the cone, and I quickly realized that was not going to work. If your pine cone pieces are not touching the cardboard cone, then your tree is going to keep getting wider and wider, and it just won't look very nice and won't work as your tree. When you get to the top of the tree, try to line up all the little pieces so they're coming to a point. Once I covered the whole cone with pine cone pieces, I noticed there were a couple of places that seemed like they were a little bit lacking, so I'm adding some of my leftover pine cone pieces into those areas with hot glue. This DIY is a pretty little pine cone display. I'm trimming off all the spiky bits of the pine cone with scissors to make it easier to handle the pine cones. I'm using this metallic paint in the color Champagne Gold by Decor. I'm painting all the edges of the pine cones with the gold paint. I have these wood beads and I'm using 12 of them, 6 for each pine cone. I'm threading all the beads onto a skewer. I find this is the easiest way to paint wood beads, especially this size, which fits perfectly onto the skewer and they don't move around while painting. I'm painting all the beads white with a white acrylic paint. I have this glitter dust paint from Decor in the shade Ice Crystal, and I'm adding a layer of this over top of the white paint on the wood beads. This gives a very slight shimmer and sparkle to the beads. I'm adding the beads to 2 of the 3 pine cones, and I'm just pushing them into place, but you could of course also use hot glue just to make it all more secure. Click the link to the playlist in my description box for more holiday DIY decor inspiration. Give this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments which of the 5 pinecone Christmas DIYs was your favorite. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.